Hello and welcome to the Womb-Centered Healing Podcast. I'm Sama Morningstar and I have Shadae here with me. Thank you so much for joining us, Shadae, in the Womb-Centered Healing Temple. This is my online space. So it's like you've come to the temple for a moment to talk with us and share about your womb-centered healing work. So I'd love for you to introduce yourself and share about that a little bit.
Shadae, like you said, and I am an herbalist, a womb wellness practitioner, postpartum care specialist, and abundance mindset coach. And I am the co-founder of House of Umi, which is a holistic wellness consultancy that my partner and I have created, where we specialize in reproductive and womb wellness through the modalities of energy work, plant-based lifestyle, and herbs.
Beautiful. Wow, you really got that all formulated. You say that so well.
I have some cheat notes.
What's that?
I said I've got some cheat notes.
You got some notes. Okay, good. And so I'd love to hear more about your personal story about what got you into womb-centered healing. I heard in your description of some of the titles, postpartum care, herbalism, things like that. I always love to hear about how people get turned on to all of that. What experiences brought you to these practices?
Yeah, so growing up in my family, I witnessed like my mother, my grandmother, a lot of the matriarchs in my family that suffered from mood disorders, depression, anxiety, degenerative nerve diseases. And I knew that I didn't want that for myself. And so I had always been drawn to like natural, holistic forms of healing. And so I delved deeply into that in high school when I kind of had my awakening. And that led me, for when I got pregnant, to start seeking natural healing and just natural ways of learning about pregnancy and women's health. And when I started to research that, I realized that I didn't really know much about my own body, or about pregnancy or what happens afterward. And I thought, wow, this is crazy that I'm pregnant now and I've never really learned any of these concepts and ideas. And I feel like people should learn this before they get in the position. So that really put a fire in me to want to learn so much more. So of course I went through my pregnancy journey. I had a natural home birth, and then I got to my postpartum, and it was good, but it was kind of difficult, as postpartum periods can be. And I just continued to allow my experience to inform what I wanted to learn. So after I had my son, I had a lot of yeast issues, and I started embodying a plant-based lifestyle. And then I also learned about vaginal steaming. And when I started doing vaginal steaming in combination with eating a plant-based diet, my yeast infections totally were gone. I actually went to a women's ceremony, and we did like a little release, like we put some rose petals in a water bowl, and I said, I'm going to release this yeast issue. And I literally did not have any more yeast infections after that. So a huge part of my work is physical, but it's also emotional and understanding the energetic and spiritual aspects of this work and aspects of the womb space. And so I feel like I've really been led into this work through a calling from my ancestors and through me witnessing my own family struggle with these things, and know that there has to be another answer.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Every time I hear someone's story, we're all on a parallel journey on this. I mean, I could just change some of the circumstances and it would be the same story for me, and for so many women that I've talked to. So thank you for sharing about that. And some questions that came up for me that our what we're talking about a lot in the womb-centered healing temple right now have to do with healing womb trauma and what that means. I know I've been exploring and looking at how um, our physiological and emotional responses to acute traumas, as well as prolonged ongoing trauma like we all have with this whole neglect of our wombs that's built into the culture that we're raised in, where we're taught to ignore and bypass and just try to carry on with life as usual over here, that is supposed to exclude menstruation and the health of the female reproductive system altogether is excluded from normal life, in quotes, if you're just listening to the audio. And so that's very traumatic, to have such a core essential part of our being completely excluded from normal life. And so all of us are suffering from that baseline trauma. And then on top of that, there's often a long history in an individual's life, as well as in their ancestors' life, of acute traumas stacked on top of that. And so our physiological and emotional response to trauma is often then one of the factors in some of the health challenges that we might have, some that you described that your family members and possibly ancestors that were threatening to pass down to you, right? Because those were sort of what our body does and what our emotions do to protect ourselves from that unresolved trauma, is we package it up and store it away somewhere. So it's either stored in the nervous system, being in a chronic loop that then becomes inflamed in a chronic trauma loop, or somewhere in the body that cuts an area off from the rest of the body and doesn't get circulation and becomes stagnant. Oftentimes it's in the womb itself that the stagnation and the sort of inflammation response results in various menstrual and fertility health issues and overall health issues. And so I'm really zeroing in on how this chronic state of trauma and trauma coping is at the root cause of many of the health and wellness challenges that we're facing today. And so I'm curious, and for me, steaming and variety of other practices are really helping to address that trauma, as well as the at the same time as these physiological health concerns. And so I'm curious to hear your experience with that, and how that shows up for you.
Yeah, so I feel that the trauma that you speak of that is present with all of us is a reflection of Mother Earth, and that our wombs are a reflection of what's happening on our Earth and our planet. And just like you said, us neglecting our womb space and our feminine energy and going on with life as usual is the same thing that we're doing to the planet. We're ignoring the fact that we're degrading the planet, that we are not taking care of the earth the way that we should. And I think that is why all of us as women or people with wombs are feeling that pain inside of us. So I definitely agree with that. And I feel that that womb trauma that we experience can really be a blockage to our creative selves and us being in our purpose. And that's what I have come across again and again with my clients, is the stagnancy is the big thing that we have in common when we have womb issues. So it's emotional stagnancy, it's physical stagnancy. And speaking of steaming, that is a beautiful way of helping to release that stagnancy that we've been holding for so long. So when I found out about steaming, it was like profound. It felt so amazing. I had never felt like a feeling like that, such warmth in my womb space, and I just wanted to share that with others. And once I started to research and also study and then become a yoni steam practitioner, I wanted to share those results with other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, hear your story. You say it so eloquently. I'm sure many other listeners who've also followed in those same footsteps, myself included, can relate to that journey of like, wow, this steaming thing, it really gets the circulation going. It warms everything up, because that's what the physiological response to trauma is, right? To chronic or acute trauma, it puts our nervous system into fight and flight mode, which sends all the blood to the limbs for running away and fighting, as well as then another part of that mode is freeze. So it can also just freeze everything, put everything into sleep mode. That's also one coping mechanism that the nervous system implements. So all of those, either taking a blood flow away from the central organs to the extremities, or freezing the flow of blood and digestion and everything, and slowing everything down so you look like you're already dead, so that the lion just, or whatever, doesn't come after you because you don't look like you're alive anymore, right? So that all is a very cold, stagnant thing, especially if it's going on for long periods of time, right? We're really only designed to be in that mode for maybe 10 minutes out of the week when we're actually running away from the tiger. And that action of running away from the tiger gets your circulation going. And it's supposed to keep, it's designed that way so it keeps enough circulation going in your organs that it's not a problem. And then the trauma is no longer present, and there's wild animal ways of releasing that energy, whether it's from the actual running away, or if you went and hid, the prey animals that go and hide, then they sit there and they shake and they tremble and all of this. And it's all these natural responses are designed to keep the circulation going and get the circulation back into the internal organs again after the trauma is over. But if we are in this continued state of trauma, which we are, then that goes into our internal organs, particularly our wombs, especially since that's the center of what a lot of the trauma is focused on. It just becomes so stagnant because we never get that circulation back going into it. And so this steaming of like, oh wow, this heat, warming it up, melting the adhesions, melting the scar tissue, melting the emotional shutdown around that whole area, bringing up old emotions that have been stored in there and finally letting them release. And all of this is so powerful. And then we want to share it. We want to share it. We're like, oh my goodness. And so that's why, listeners, if this is the first time you're hearing about vaginal steaming, you might notice that vaginal steam practitioners tend to be quite passionate about it because it's such a powerful thing. And it can also stir up some controversy because there's a lot of energy in society that says, no, we got to keep that packaged up and let's not get those energies flowing at all. And we'll try to convince you that vaginal steaming is not valid at all. Have you dealt with that much in your practice?
Yeah, not excessively, but I definitely have had people ask me like, "Oh, I heard that gynecologists don't recommend this. What do you feel about that?" And I personally feel that it's just not a moneymaker for the medical industry. And even if a gynecologist is not focused on the money, they haven't been trained in any of these natural therapies. So a lot of doctors that have gone to medical school and things like that that are against these practices have not ever tried them. And they say that, like, one of the things they say is that, oh, it can make infection worse. But I am living testimony that yoni steaming actually cleared my infection. And you just have to be mindful of your symptoms. Like, I advise people when they have like yeast or BV or things like that to steam for only a shorter amount of time so that you don't continue to aggravate with heat. But doing a steam is not going to damage you in any which way. It's a very gentle therapy.
Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly not going to damage you as much as taking antibiotics or antifungals that often aren't really specific to the actual fungus, and it's not addressing the whole balance of your microbiome, and it's not addressing, I mean, oftentimes the reason we have chronic yeast or other kinds of infections in the womb is because it's sort of stashed away in a back pocket of the womb somewhere, where the whole body is sort of hiding it away. And oftentimes oral antibiotics or antifungals can't get to it, or even suppository antifungals can't get to it. And then even if it does get to it, it disrupts the natural microbiome, because it's usually a much stronger tool for the job than is really needed, you know, where it wipes out a whole bunch of healthy bacteria, and then it's really hard for the body to get a balance, back to balance again. And it also does, those topical or oral antibiotics or antifungals don't address the overall condition of the body that's making it conducive to infection. So it's not holistic, and so then you keep getting the same infection because you have the same circumstances that made you what's the word I'm looking for, made you have a proclivity towards infections in the first place, and that's not being addressed. So the underlying causes, and it's certainly not addressing the emotional causes like you were talking about, or the spiritual causes, energetic causes, which often underlie any physiological symptoms. There's often an emotional or spiritual cause. I'd love for you to share more about that from your experience, especially either specifically around the infections you had or anything else that comes up for you, what you've noticed. I'd love to our listeners to hear that described, like how you became aware that a particular emotional or spiritual thing was going on at underlying a physiological womb healing process. I heard you tell the story of the releasing things into the bowl of rose petals. I'd love to hear more specifics about what that was about for you.
Yeah, definitely. So, in general, like in my studies and my experience, I've learned that we all, in addition to having a physical body, we all have an energetic body, emotional body. And so, when we have wounds or trauma in our emotional body, it travels, if we don't address them and if we don't process them, it travels to our physical body. So every physical issue that we have is something that was present in our energetic and emotional body beforehand. And it's something that is it's becoming present in our physical body so that we will pay attention to it. So our body is trying to get our attention. And so when I had that experience with the infections, I'm sure you're familiar with Louise Hay. I looked her up.
I'm sorry, tell me the name again.
Louise Hay. I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it. She has I forget exactly the name of her book. It's really popular though, and it's all about like
Louise Hay. Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's all about the physical and emotional ties to things. So I looked up in her book what yeast infections meant, and she talked about you feeling out of control. And I definitely felt like that was present in my life because my pregnancy was unexpected. And so I didn't really plan to have children. And when I got pregnant, I felt very out of control. I felt like, oh my gosh, I'm not ready for this. So I think that that was something that I carried with me for a while as I was getting used to motherhood. And also just not really taking the steps I needed to take to be as healthy as I could be. I feel like I wasn't totally present with what my body needed. And so when I started to take charge of my health and do the things I knew I could do to heal myself, I feel like that is why the infections cleared. And of course with the physical things, but I think I was beginning to resolve that feeling of like being passive or being a victim. And I realized I'm never a victim and I always have power to respond in a positive way.
Beautiful. And so that ceremony that you described with the rose petals, could you if for those of our listeners who might not have experience with a ceremony like that, how did it help you to fortify this new way of looking at things and releasing that other way of looking at things?
Yeah, so we gathered at a home in California, and it was probably like 15 of us women, and we all kind of just went around and shared what we were feeling during that. I think it was a full moon during that time, and we were just asked the instructions of the exercise were just to, decide what it is that you're releasing and put it in like this water bowl with everybody. And yeah, I did that. And I honestly don't know if I have much else to share about it besides like that I was shocked that I didn't have one more yeast infection after that. I feel like that, I actually feel that maybe because I had started doing, the plant-based lifestyle, I had started doing the steaming, but I think maybe making that verbal declaration was like the last thing. Like I needed to verbally and emotionally take authority over my body.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it wasn't that ceremony alone eliminated the infections. It was an added like bonus declaration that as part of a whole system of changes that you'd been making around your diet, around your herbal treatments, using the steaming and all of that. And then boom, this was your intention to come into a new way of being around all those feelings.
Definitely.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, so is there anything else that you feel particularly inspired about sharing about in your practice? What seems to be some common themes for you in lately in how you're supporting women to heal through vaginal steaming and plant-based and energy healing work?
Yeah, so what kind of inspired my partner and I to come together on the platform we've created now is because I have had this background in womb healing and, everything that I've done, but she suffered from endometriosis for pretty much ever since she had her period. And she's now 28. And so it's been a long and arduous journey for her. Every period that she had was, vomiting, nausea, blacking out, like she couldn't get out of bed. And through protocols that her and I came up with together, we have been able to reverse that. And she now has like her last period, she forgot she was on her period. And that was like a profound moment for her. So we were really inspired, obviously, like that we were able to do this just through natural modalities. And she ate plant-based. She ate a lot of high raw content foods. She stayed consistent with doing vaginal steaming and taking also hormone balancing herbs. And through a period of, I think about 6 months is when it started to improve dramatically. And so something that we come across a lot when people come to us and they have womb conditions or cramping or just whatever issues is they're like, oh, what herb do I use? They're kind of looking for this quick fix because Western medicine has kind of taught us that you can use a pill to fix these things. And something that we really try to share is that it's not just one thing. It's a whole lifestyle change that needs to happen. It's a whole perspective change that needs to happen. And there's a level of commitment that you need to have to your health and your vitality to really follow through with this, because it's not easy to be consistent with all of these new changes in your life. And, we all have temptations all around us and energies that, kind of tempt us to not treat ourselves as healthily as we should. So we just really like to share that consistency is one of the main ingredients to healing, commitment and consistency. And so we do coaching programs with our clients so that we can help them maintain that consistency and that accountability. Because a lot of times we've noticed when we just, sell them herbs that they don't really stay consistent and they might take them sporadically and things like that. So, yeah, that's a big message for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would say that goes hand in hand with some of the things that I talk about, especially around the trauma, because that ongoing trauma sets up a system where we're really kind of starving for attention in those places that we've packaged away, and especially in the womb, because our womb is the seat of our core essence and identity and our direct connection to divine guidance. And because of this trauma of negating and devaluing and sweeping that aside, and paying attention to other normal life things, or right, supposedly, with that being separate, even though that's the source of all life. Without wombs, none of us would be here, right? So this split between what's actually true about the womb and how we're actually treating the womb creates this void, this hunger, this lack of a sense of self and grounding that gives us that predisposes us to getting addicted to the things that the dominant culture of society that wants us all to stay that disconnected from our ground of being, right? Wants us to stay that because we're easy to exploit when we're in that state. Okay, so people are easy to sort of guide like sheep when we're in that state. When we're in our power and fully connected, it's much harder to do that. So the society wants us to be that way, that's run by domination-based, power hungry, greedy people. So when you say temptations, I'm thinking it's not temptations towards anything that's really good for us. It's addictions to things that keep us disempowered and disconnected from ourselves. And so I just wanted to share a little bit how the things that were coming up when you were describing that, because it's linked back towards that chronic trauma that creates this void in us. And my experience of getting more plant-based and herbal nutrition is that as I experience, and as my the people that I work with, and I'm sure the people that you work with and yourself too, as we experience real nutrition and real connection with our core and our inner source of our own inner power, then we're not as addicted to those substances and lifestyle choices that don't really feed us and keep us starving and easy to exploit. So I know I use some strong language in there, and it's really true. I mean, these are some of the modern day issues of how our society is exploiting some people and giving very few people all this power to exploit others. And I feel that womb-centered healing is very revolutionary for that. And so any words you might have, or words of wisdom or encouragement you might have around that, would be very welcome.
Yeah, that brought up for me the idea of fear. I think a lot of people with wombs and women are fearful to let go of those addictions.
Mm-hmm.
They're fearful to, guide their own healing versus listening to their doctor,
Mm-hmm.
because they don't feel that authority within themselves. They feel like someone else knows their body better than they do.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would say to that is to lean into your fear. Let your fear guide you, but don't let it stop you.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is that, like, we all have fears when it comes to following our purpose and being our best selves. But facing those fears is usually the guide to you having your best life and you being in your power. So if you do feel fear around those things, around letting go of those addictions, realize that on the other side of that fear is your best life. And that like overcoming that fear is going to renew you and revitalize you and allow you to be actually present with the moment. And I think for my own journey, I have had addictions and things that I was afraid to release. And when I did, shoot, I lost my thought. Can we pause?
Okay, go ahead.
So yeah, when I had addictions and things that I was afraid to release, I was able to realize that like when I did face those fears and then overcome them, I realized that I was afraid of being present in my life. I was afraid of like actually living and being alive. I feel like so many of us are, you know, doing the day to day, but we're not actually alive. We're not actually like doing the things that make our hearts excited. And those addictions and those all those distractions, they are getting in the way of you being fully alive and being fully empowered. So if anyone is dealing with these doubts or these fears or, you know, any of that, just understand that on the other side of that is real life.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much. On the other side of that is real life. All right. Thank you so much for such a vibrant and welcoming invitation for us to overcome those fears and engage with fully being alive. So if someone wanted to get in touch with you and learn more about your programs and your offerings, how might they do so?
Yeah, they can find us at our website, which is www.houseofumi.co. And that's co, not com.
Okay.
Yeah.
So House of Umi, how do you spell Umi?
It's UMI.
Okay. Great and wonderful. So hopefully those listeners who would like to talk with Shadae more, please go to her website and find out more about what she's up to. And as well, if you're curious about the Womb-Centered Healing Temple, you can go to wombcenteredhealing.com with an M at the end and learn about the membership site. You can sign up on the booking page for a free womb wellness assessment and learn all about how to read your menstrual cycle and how these types of herbal therapies might help any overall health imbalances that your menstrual cycle did or is giving you. So this kind of assessment is good for not only women who are currently bleeding, but if you used to bleed and no longer bleed for whatever reason, whether that's hysterectomy or menopause, or you're just not bleeding anymore, this assessment can help by looking at what used to go on or what symptoms you currently have to find your optimum health through using that information from the womb as a vital sign. So, and I'm sure, Shadae, you have systems like that too. When you have new clients, you discuss and you look at all of these details and the menstrual cycle and everything it tells us about it. And then we design herbal steaming protocols and dietary change and lifestyle change plans and support. I think we work very similarly. Then we support everyone through that process. So you're welcome to reach out to either one of us for more information about any of that, and we encourage you to do so because sometimes we really need to have somebody that can support us through those kinds of changes. So here we are, ready to support you. All right. Well, thank you so much, Shadae, and thank you, listeners. That's all for now. Until next time.